So I'm going to introduce the speaker and also say a little bit about building research. Gavin is a forces vet, this ticks one of the boxes with our president, Jimmy, who told us in a session, Meet the Branch, a couple of weeks ago, that he was a vet himself and he was very keen to support them. So Gavin being a vet, obviously they have a link in this. And Gavin actually gained his fire experience with the RF in various locations, Afghanistan, Iraq, Falklands and more. And starting as a firefighter, but moving through health and safety, fire safety, and then backing it up with training. And then when he finished in the forces, he did a brief stint with the NHS. But it was for his experience with his training that he was actually approached by BRE to join their technical join them as a technical trainer, and he has only just joined them, so he is not new to training, but he's new to BRE. We've had a long-standing relationship with the building research establishment, and have not so long ago, one of our committee members was also in their safety department down at BRE, and this enabled us to run joint sessions together, conferences and the like. Now, BRE itself has gone through a number of reorganisation. They've lost key staff, and not helped by COVID, them and us have lost contact with each other. So I've worked hard with the new team there to try and get something back and established. And Gavin is the first recruit they've got that's put his, well, I don't know whether he did put his hand above the parapet, but anyway, he has been volunteered to talk to us on one of the subjects that BRE have a greater interest in it. So Gavin himself will give you a brief intro anyway to BRE, but I can add a little bit of my own, because I'm up now because I'm retired, but I started life as in HM Factory Inspectorate, and during my stint there in the 70s, I was at Watford and I visited their site, and one of the features there, of course, which some may be aware of, is the model of the Mona Dam. Those who are up into World War II will know that the Mona Dam was a feature of the dam busters, and in fact the part of the modelling was done by the Barnes-Wallis team for their bouncing bomb was this very model that you can see, or what's left of it, and it is on the BRE site, which is still there for all to see. So I've got photographs of that in black and white Polaroid because as an inspector I was issued with a Polaroid camera, but that was taken a couple of years of one of the I took it to one of the BRE events we had. But my interest in BRE as an inspector didn't finish with that, because it brings me to the next slide. You'll recognize that. Now, for those of you into airship technology, in the background are the two large hangars associated with it, built in World War I for the large airships we had at that time. And during the 80s and 90s, BRE used the farthest one for large-scale fire testing. Of course, they didn't stay there. They contracted from that facility, I think, back to their main area, and that was then taken over for one of its original purposes, and that's where the Airlander, once it came to this country, was then rebuilt and then went into test. And you could see I was on a visit sponsored by them. I took the photograph both of the hangar and the Airlander. That's before they managed to crash it. But it still lives because they've now vacated the site, and then they're moving on with their this is the hybrid air vehicles moving on to the production phase of their what will be known as the Airlander 10. So that's a bit of background that I have to BRE, but let's move on now to what we've got today. Some of you may remember a joint seminar which we did in 2017 when David Crowder, who some of you may recognize, one of their fire investigators, gave an in-depth account into the investigation of the Lacanal House fire, which was then still ongoing. This, as some of you may know, was months before Grenfell. And whilst Gavin is not going to talk in depth at all about Grenfell, he will briefly mention both Lacanal and Grenfell in his talk. Now, our links with IOSH links with BRE don't finish at that point, because hot off the press, that the gentleman there is Dr. Peter Bonfield, who has just joined us as of Monday this week as chair of our board of trustees. Now, significantly, in the earlier days, Dr. Peter Bonfield was CEO of BRE itself. And indeed, the photograph there, which was taken at one of our first sessions that we ran jointly with BRE, that's Dr. Peter at the desk in BRE. And to show it's not totally false, there is one of our banners at the back of it. Things that come around go around, as they say. Now, just to repeat, this is the session is the first of many with BRE. Can we look forward, say, to a conference with them at some time in the future? Maybe the appropriate time of that will be when some of the outstanding fire legislation is in place, and we've probably got more to say. But at this point, let's move on to the next thing, Q&A. The way we should use that is, if you've got a question, can you use the chat, but put a Q in front of it? And a number of our members are working in the background to identify questions. And when we finish the session, we will ask various to speak on, put the question forward, and either Gavin will answer it, or if it's not in the area of subject that he's familiar with, Ian, we have from our file safety group standing by to answer those questions. What we don't cover, we can obviously come back to later, and whether directly or through email or whatever. But just to reiterate, we want to keep away from Grenfell, because it's obviously it's a political matter at the present time, and obviously there are ongoing legal issues, so we can only really skate over Grenfell per se. And then just finally, there will be a post-event questionnaire circulated to those that have signed in. So it's my time to disappear or sign off or retire into one of the little windows, and I'll hand over to Gavin.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Nice one. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for that, Tony. Much appreciated. And yeah, welcome. 300 people. That caught me by surprise for that one. It's also great to see the number of veterans that have come on. Just to keep me grounded, I've got my own pack of crayons for the army lot out there, so you'll be all right. I've got a statement that I've been asked to read out from BRE. It does relate to what's going on with the public inquiry and everything. So I'm just going to quickly read it off. It is written down, so I do apologise for that one. BRE prides itself on a rigorous and independent approach to building safety, which is why our expertise is trusted and respected around the globe. For example, after Grenfell Tower fire, we supported both MHCLG and the Metropolitan Police in their investigations into the cause of the fire. Having carried out classification tests on products made by some of the manufacturers whose products are being investigated, BRE is currently a core participant in Grenfell Tower inquiry and continues to support fully with the inquiry process. Current and former BRE colleagues are due to give evidence from the end of February. Please note this has been delayed due to suspension in December. BRE is not a regulator, nor does it have any enforcement powers. It has no mandate, role, or authority to monitor what manufacturers and suppliers do with the test and classification reports it provides, and has no oversight as to how they're used to fulfill their obligations under building regulations. That's that bit done. So I'm going to move on. Hopefully this flows quite nicely for everyone and it's easy to understand. Try that one. Oh, I've got to do it on this button. A little bit for the BRE then, making a positive difference in the built environment since 1921. We are 100 years old this year. As Tony said, I am new to BRE. I've never actually been on site either. I've never met my line manager. So it would be nice to have a bit of jelly and ice cream or something for a 100th birthday, but we shall see. Mission is to build a better world together and to enable positive change in the built environment. The aim of the Academy is, I think we'll touch further into this later on with some of the core competencies and knowledge, but it's to enable training provided for the built environment, high quality, world-class training, and just kind of like moving forward and helping with CPD and things like that. So hopefully events like this is going to help out. So the stuff that we're going to cover on the session: what was fire safety, how it's changed, where it is at the moment, and what's the future of fire safety. This one kind of touches on something that I would imagine the majority of you will be aware of. It was massive back in the day, and some of the changes that happened because of the Piper Alpha incident, it was the speed at which changes were starting to be made and everything. As details were coming out straight away, industry was getting on top of it. For some strange reason, the built environment, fire safety seems to be a little bit slower. We'll look at through some of those. Excuse me, it's not wine, although I wish it was. Some of the fires that have happened in, particularly on this slide here, they are all England. You go straight back to 1666, the Great Fire of London. We saw changes from made straight away because of the Fire of London, things like widening of streets to create a fire break, a bit like managed forests have these days. Building materials, you had to then build out of stone rather than timbers and other more flammable materials. Then there was the Keighley, Eastwood Mills, and changes were made to that because of the alarm systems. Bradford City Football Club, I'm sure a lot of people remember that one. That was quite a horrendous incident, as was King's Cross. But more recently, Grenfell, that's, dare I say, it's turned the industry on its head. There's a lot of things coming out from it. There's a lot of changes to be made. And yes, there are a lot of finger pointing to be done. Then looking at this one, these are kind of nightclubs, but I picked these ones. They're more recent. They are global. So it's trying to move away from just the fact that things happen in England, the UK and such. But there's a couple on there that I'd like to particularly point out. The Station nightclub fire in 2003, Rhode Island. That was predominantly a timber-built nightclub, single story. 100 people passed away from that incident, and that was based on sprinkler systems that the kind of grandfather laws back in those days. because of the age of the building, it didn't need sprinkler systems. However, that incident has changed the American system, and there's actually countries, Taiwan as one, have changed their regulations based on what happened in America. Another one was the Formosa Fun Coast explosion. It was a dust explosion at a party event. The machine blew coloured powder, which was cornstarch, into the audience, and there was ignition sources, which then there is, for both the Station Fire Club and the Formosa one, there are videos on YouTube, both pretty, yeah, viewer discretion, put it that way. They're quite graphic, and some of the sound of people making, it's quite, yeah. Another one I just want to bring up as well that I've not put on those slides, it was something I was reading earlier, the Stardust nightclub in Dublin back in 1981. It was initially suspected to be arson because of an eyewitness saw flaming behind a seat towards the rear. But then later on, it's been discovered that somebody else at about, what I think, 1:33 in the morning, felt a sense of heat go over them. But during the original investigation from FRS, they weren't informed of this witness statement. So it's now been suggested that actually there was something in the storeroom next to a lamp room with a load of different accelerants and things like that, and possibly electric fault. So although it's still been spoken about as being arson, potentially it wasn't. Now I've got a couple of slides, and these are just different introductions, acts, regulations that have been brought in over the years. The top one there, you know, the London Building Act in 1667 after the Great Fire of London. It was then looked at again in 1897. Or they're kind of like in date order. Fire Factories Act, just for Tony there. You've got Fire Safeties Act in 47 as well. Well, in 1976, it's when you start seeing the first changes of different fire safety acts. And you got the fire certificates regulations in 76, that was revoked. Fire safety and safety of places of sport, partially replaced. They're all getting revoked, replaced, or reworded due to the introduction of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. I think at the moment the RRO is in a very grey area because of what we're going through at the moment. We'll come to that one in a minute. This slide just kind of shows the fire attendances over the years. You see there in 1988, 89, number of fires was 49, well, nearly 49,500. However, back down to through the years, getting up to more recent 1920, we've managed to reduce that significantly through better systems, better working practice. The number's still too high, but we're getting there, and we still need, there's still a lot of work to be done. The game changers. Lakanal House, July 2009. There was a lot of things that were identified from that incident. A lot of learning curves for a lot of different organisations and industries. Dare I say, things really didn't seem to change. It was looked into, things did change, certain systems and things, and there were 6 deaths from that one. And it's things are moving on, which then brings us to June 17, Grenfell Tower, 24 stories to 72 deaths. Big, massive eye-opener to industries, fire safety, building works, contract designs, project managers, all sorts. So where we're at the moment is we've got the Regulatory Reform Order, that's England and Wales. Then we've got the Fire Scotland Act and the Fire Safety Regs for Scotland. And in Northern Ireland, they've got their Fire and Rescue Services Order and their Fire Safety Regulations. But we've also got the Building Regulations 2010. All of those, are they fit for purpose? I think that's an open question. I think depends on where you're using it. There's talk of whether they're for residential, non-residential. You've got some fire services that are questioning or enacting upon them more for residentials. Fire safety duties, owners. This comes from the responsible person, which comes into a little couple of slides. And again, I think it's just the definition of responsible person and what's going to be coming into as the accountable person, because they are two different definitions. But as we stand at the moment, you've got the duty to carry out fire risk assessment. The person with responsibility is defined as and such. So within the RRO, there's 53 articles. I'm just going to touch on a few of those. I'll just mention the responsible person, and then number 5, duties under this order, but then 9, risk assessment. The risk assessment can be done by a competent person. And I think this is where we've now got another issue, is because where is competence? What is deemed as competent? You can have somebody, for example, off the tools that did an apprenticeship in 1965, for example, probably can tell you something is plumb straight just by looking at it because of their experience. However, they've never had any form of refreshment training since that period. So are they now deemed as competent? It's an area that they will be looking further into. 14, emergency routes and exits. Statistically, that's one of the highest, what's the word? When it goes to prosecuted cases from the fire side, is because of blocked exit points, locked emergency exits. People still aren't learning, and this is down to the occupant, the responsible person, the duty holder, whichever you want to call it. The other one is maintenance, which, if you look at the article itself, it doesn't go into any depth. It kind of leaves it open to the building occupant themselves. Yes, there are recommendations, there's best practice, there's industry guidance out there, but there's nothing specific that says you have to do this. Training is another one. Pet hate of mine when I was working for the NHS. It was in policy that staff will train, staff will do this. Staff didn't turn up because their priority was their care of the patient. They're doing this, they're doing that. Some of the arguments was, well, I couldn't get a car park, so they've decided not to turn up. And it's like, we have a duty of care for the training, but nobody's turning up for it. Some of the changes that they're looking at, and there's going to be changes to Articles 3 and 5, the responsible and duties. Again, that's going to be an interesting one to see how they form that together. And it's looking, they've called the Fire Safety Bill 2020, and it's possibly an amendment to the Fire Safety Order. So again, another document that industries are going to have to get their heads around. This is kind of now moving on because of what's happening in Grenfell. Independent review of building regulations and fire safety. The Building a Safer Future independent review of building regulations for fire safety. Final report was May 2018. Consultations, explanatory notes relate to the Building Safety Bill, published as draft in 20th July. Then there's proposals for reform of the building safety regulatory system. That was June 19. Then you've got government response and summary of responses to the Building a Safer Future consultations. So there's so much going on in the background, so many different sectors, industries, all having an involvement with it, and hopefully going to come together to get somewhere. There was a BSI British Standards Flex released. The deadline was yesterday for any comments, and it was produced in response to specific recommendations to improve the competence made in Dame Judith Hackett's independent review. There was a number of professional groups within the advisory group. There's just a few there. It was quite a substantive list. So hopefully plenty of subject matter experts to put their views across. Like I said, the deadline was yesterday, so it's just wait and see what comes from that one. Dame Judith Hackett, as I've mentioned, the enabling legislation, hopefully it will get royal assent by 2022. Secondary legislation, try to say that with a dry mouth. Secondary legislation 2022, and then hopefully it's going to be enforced by 2023-24 because of everything else that's going on at the moment. I think it's a watch this space on that one. I think there's a lot of work to be done in such a short period of time. Well, there's 21 National Building Safety Regulator. That's going to be an amendment under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. So it's kind of like going back around the houses, back in circles. And some of the areas that they will be looking at is principal designer, principal contractor, and the building safety manager. And you've probably heard of SCEB, the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviour. They're the big areas that are going to have some big changes on sites. Now, there's 5 parts, big parts to the draft building safety bill. I'm not going to read these out. They are very wordy, but obviously they will be on the record and everything, so you can kind of scan over properly. But just a couple of points on them. The draft bill makes a number of changes, most notably the Building Act of 1984. It's going to be establishing the regulator within the HSE, and it's also going to be amendments to the Building Act of 1984. It's going to put high risk buildings when they are occupied, defines and places duties on the accountable person, duty holder in occupation. Again, it's terminologies, and I don't speak lawyer speak, so it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And then the Architects Registration Board to be listed as well. We're then going looking at the duty holders, responsible person, accountable persons. Like I mentioned earlier, it's terminology. It's going to be deemed who's who at the time, I think, and it's going to be level of responsibility depending on the managerial level. One of which I feel sorry for is the future building safety manager. We'll look at that one. I don't know if any of you have heard of a Warren Spencer. He's one of the leading legal firms for in the country. He's a managing director for Blackhurst Budd, and he did a webinar recently, and this is one of his statements. Section 61 of the Building Safety Bill talks about appointing an accountable person. I think this emanates from the wish of Dame Judith Hackett to have a golden thread of information. The difficulty here is that the definition of an accountable person isn't the same as that of the responsible person. It seems to me that there will not be a single individual accountable for a given building. Also, it's only talking about higher risk buildings. That's omitting other types of building where we all know there are problems in relation to fire safety. Inevitably, building management companies and those responsible for maintaining premises will be involved in the mix. Kind of says it all, really. Golden thread of information, that is a term I've never heard of prior to joining BRE. I've been doing a lot of reading. I've done a few courses over the last couple of weeks, and they all seem to be regarding the building industry, but nothing prior when I was doing other roles. So it's just interesting that it seems to be out there, but not out there. So again, I think that's something that, you know, it has a fantastic meaning if we can kind of push it further. Going back to the principal designer, contractor and building safety manager, both the top two, the design and contract, they're going to have two lots of accountabilities, because although yes, they're the principal, once the work's in hand or it's in progress, they then become a designer or a contractor. So they're going to have the principal and the secondary as well. The building safety manager, fire and structural safety risks in the building day to day, and they're appointed by the accountable person, which is quite interesting because they can actually be vetoed by the building regulator as well. So whoever the accountable person decides to take on, essentially the HSE or their local delegates could veto it. So yeah. So the accountable person, building assurance certificate, this may be an individual partnership or a corporate body. So again, there's potentially no specific individual is going to be accountable. It's a broad thing. But they will be responsible for registering the building and applying for a building assurance certificate. Existing buildings that are already occupied will also need to be registered, and which are unoccupied at the introduction of the new regime. Yeah, more responsibilities there going through. The building safety regulator will issue a certificate if it is satisfied that the accountable person is complying. Keep going through. And then this, there's actually a lot more to the building safety managers, but due to time, I thought I'd just narrow it down a little bit. One of their obligations for the accountable person is to appoint, like I've mentioned, but then they've got the capability, relevant skills, knowledge, experience, and the behaviours. So again, that whole SCEB thing. How they're going to deem somebody that's got everything that's going to be coming under them, I've got no idea. It's going to be a decent pay packet for the person to take that responsibility on. But then the accountable person must notify the building safety regulator, like I said, so that they can be vetoed on that one. The safety manager can be an individual or organisation whose principal role is to support the accountable person, complying with their own statutory duties set out in the bill, complying with all directions given and statutory notices issued, cooperating with other occupiers or owners of the building, including any other person acting as a responsible person on the fire safety order. So kind of the future for BRE, all of that's happening that we are pushing and supporting the changes for fire safety in the built environment. There's going to be continuation of testing and certification. There will continue with the third-party accreditation and looking at the competencies gaps, working with other organisations, industries, looking at training needs analysis, skills gap analysis, and working on that skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours. Developing new training material to support that, growing the training team. We are looking at taking on more technical trainers, and like events like this, we are looking at creating other relationships with industries and other professionals to try and like get a better of understanding of everything that's going on. So they're kind of like what we've what I've touched on. So yeah, I rattled through that quick.
Well, thank you very much, Gavin. I think it needs very careful review as we go through this, because it changes and will change. And unfortunately, it's legislation on top of legislation on top of legislation, which doesn't make it easy to follow. And the type of people that we are needed to be co-opted on this, so it's going to be a real training chore to try and get this over, get the message over. Otherwise, it's never going to deliver what is intended. So thanks for that quick run through. Your business is not done, and BRE's business is not yet done. Probably it's time for a pause now for some Q&A. So it's over to you, Melissa.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Gavin. And just wanted to also mention that we have Ian Scott. He's joined us from the Fire Risk Group. So I want to thank Ian also. There were a couple of good questions that came through. So I think the first one I'll raise on behalf of Alan Anderson, just as Gavin, you talked about the fire safety bill. He asked, are extra responsibilities being laid onto the principal designer and principal contractor?
Yeah. Again, it's another grey area that they've brought out, that they've mentioned the principal designer and contractors. They're essentially that, because once you're a designer as a principal, you'll then become, once the works is in place, so you will have extra responsibilities no matter what your role is. So if you are the principal, if you're just a normal designer, then you've got one set of responsibilities. But because you're the principal, you've then got the principal and then any secondaries beyond.
What about the principal contractor?
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Sorry, I totally can relate with Tony, so I can't see the screen anymore, but that's okay. So thanks for that. Another question that was raised was around competencies for fire risk assessments.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there would be any changes on competency requirements.
I think there's already talk through the likes of ASFP. There's going to be different levels, level 2, level 3. So, for example, if you get asked a question, you have to then go look in the book to find the answer. You would be considered as level 2. If you can then go out onto site and be able to dictate what is in the book without looking it up, then it's going to be considered level 3. Again, I think as legislations, regs, and all the rest of them change, I think there's going to be, to a certain degree, a re-education package, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. If you look at things like the healthcare technical memorandums, HTMs, the details in there are different from normal fire risk assessments. So you'd use either a PAS 79 system or a HTM system. So I think there are going to be changes with what is considered a competent fire risk assessor.
Okay, thanks for that. Another question, I'll raise it on maybe either yourself or Ian. So this is on behalf of Danny Minan. He asks, could you please confirm if there is an intermittent paint that can be applied to cast iron structural columns? Or the paint in the yellow book deals with steel only? It's a very technical question.
Yeah, Ian, if you don't mind, would you mind taking that one for me?
Thank you, Gavin.
You're welcome.
That's okay. It's a very interesting question. If you go and look these things up, you'll find that some manufacturers and some databases and such like refer to steel and cast iron in the same sentence. There are, I said, half a dozen, there are probably 4 or so manufacturers: Jotun, Thermogard, International Paints, who make a wide range of paints for all sorts of commercial applications, and Firetex are some of them. And there's an organisation called promane.co.uk, who are agents for many of these people, Jotun in particular. So what I would actually do is go back to basics with this particular question and the search for data and information. Speak to the manufacturers, speak to the architect, speak to the designer. We've just talked about the principal designer and the principal contractor, and find out what was in their mind, what was their intent and such like when the structure is being built or maintained. And the maintenance bit also is very significant there, because you might be changing a use or renovating a building or restructuring it or repurposing it. Is to go back and try and find as much fundamental information as you can, and then put that together with other experts in your fire risk assessment, as it were.
Is it worth adding as well, with regards to making change of buildings and things, the regulation 38, that a lot of people, certainly within the building industry, kind of seem to admit from details? I know recently with courses that we've done, fire doors and such, you mentioned regulation 38, and they look dumbfounded. They've never heard of it.
Indeed. Thank you, Melissa.
No, thank you. I'm going to ask Michael Fields to maybe come off mute. He asked a question. I'm not sure what's this, but how does this apply to refurbishments and other works? So Michael, if you wanted to maybe just clarify it a bit further, if you're still on. Okay, maybe not. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions come through. Just a lot of comments and chats. So yeah, don't know if anyone else has a question.
Melissa, can I just pick up on something that David Thomas has just said?
Okay, yeah, go ahead, of course.
Just for those that haven't seen it, David's written, they are missing the key point. As long as it's cheaper and acceptable to value engineer out safety issue from capital budget and put onus on building user revenue / operational budget, we won't move forward. I think that's been true. I think there's a lot of cases in the past that if you advise the responsible person or whoever's that, you know, it would be best to implement whatever system, the amount of times you get told the budget's not there. I recall once sending an email out, the subject title was fire safety. 2 weeks later, I got a read report on an email deleted without reading. Spoke to the individual. When I mentioned what it was about, she went, "Oh, sorry about that. Fire safety is not my priority." And we've got attitudes within sectors that either people aren't bothered or the budget. People don't want to spend the money.
Thanks, Gavin. I don't know if David, you wanted to add anything to that? If not, Gavin, someone mentioned that you used the term BSI Flex.
Yes.
So if what's the terminology? If you can maybe
Right.
elaborate a bit more on it.
Oh God, it's one of those forms that it actually said not to copy it or anything else. So I had to make some scrappy little notes about it. Right, if you just bear with me a second. Oh, what's happened to my screen? Right, let's just get rid of that one. Talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
Well, David has come back and said his sound is off, so.
Okay. Right, I apologise for looking away from the screen. It's on the other screen. Basically, the BSI Flex 8670, it's an overarching framework for building safety competence of individuals specification. It's a document that's 64 pages long. It is actually available on the BSI website. Well, it was until yesterday for people to download, review and send comments in. For those that aren't aware, it's actually quite good to get yourself onto the BSI website for future things like this, because you do get the opportunity to comment. So yeah, there was introduction, figure 1, competence is a combination of skills. It's the whole SCED thing. So it's reviewing how they're going to make changes, looking into that. Figure 2 was industry culture, is a combination of technical competence, behavioural competence and ethical standards. I think that ethical standards also kind of touches on what David mentioned. It's about budget and things like that. Not going for the cheapest product, not going for the quickest way of doing it. You know, measure twice, cut once type thing. And then, yeah, just it goes through quite a few pages. But yeah, if it's available on the British Standards website, it's worth having a look.
Excellent. Thanks, Gavin. There was a question that came up here. I'll raise it. It talks about the fire service being criticized. So would there be any changes around the fire service having input, particularly on current buildings?
I would think so. I know the National Fire Chiefs organisation are involved, and there are another number of fire service departments. Blacknell House and Grenfell highlighted so many, I don't want to use the word failings. There were so many things that were identified that weren't right. The police were commented on, the fire services were commented on, the councils, the materials, the buildings, contractors. I think everybody needs to have an input to get it right, but it's going to take time. Like Ian said, there's so many people, Tony said, there's so many people involved to get it right 100%. It's yeah, it's a minefield.
Oh, agree. Thanks for that. No, that's it in terms of questions on comments. I know there were lots of, something just came through. Does this mean the fire service will start issuing fire certificates?
I don't, interesting one. I don't know. I know that obviously they used to. I would imagine that would have to be from the building regulators, HSE, to decide on which direction. Yeah. What do you think, Ian?
Thank you. I honestly, truthfully, and generally don't know the answer, but I would imagine, if this is a thought process, no, we would not want to revert to that particular setting again, because so much in health and safety is almost down to self-regulation and self-assessment, etc., against criteria. So I don't think we'd revert to that as such, because so much is down to the responsible person, the organisation, the employer, or the whoever, to assess the risks themselves. So I think we'd still be on a self-assessment process.
Okay, okay, thanks. Tim Birkin's hand was up. I don't know, Tim, if you had a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. I put it in the questions earlier. Probably got lost in translation there.
I apologise.
No worries. So my question to Gav or Ian, will in the new legislation there be provision for a requirement to have a fire risk assessment done, and indeed will there be any penalties if actions from the fire assessment are not put right? In terms of economic penalties, because I think this is what building owners really feel, is when people start dipping in their pockets, is basically they cannot insure their building unless they have a proper assessment, fire risk assessment with an action plan that's been rectified and evidenced by competent people. Is there a plan to do that? Because for me, that's really the crux of the matter to start to put things right. Maybe I'm naive, but I just wondered if anything that was in the pipeline for this.
As far as I'm aware at the moment, the building regulator, who's going to be coming under the HSE, they will have those powers. They will be able to ask for assistance from local authority, such as either the council or the fire service, who then can either say, yes, we shall assist, or no, we won't. But if they say, no, we won't, they will have to go back to the HSE with a good explanation as to why, who then, from what I understand, can say, well, you're doing it anyway. So then, like you say, financial penalties is where these big corporations feel the pain. So I think if they're going to, I don't know if any of you saw, there was a thing on Keir Starmer the other day talking about the future for fire safety. And he was saying, it was on a lunchtime programme on Monday. It's worth just catch up on TV. He did a little speak about it. And he was talking about all the other aspects and the things that need to be done and how they are kind of pushing for it. So again, with a lot of it, it is a matter of watch this space. But yeah, that's some of the things I've read. That is the idea, that it will be coming under HSE and they will have better regulatory options against them.
Yep, I agree with you, Gavin. That's my impression as well. But also I understand that there may well be gateway processes. And if this is a new design, for example, and somebody's putting forward proposals to construct a new building, there will be gateways which you have to pass through, and you have to get through them successfully before proceeding to the next stage. So if, to take a flippant example, if somebody, an architect, forgets to put in an alternative means of escape, for example, then they're going to have to change the plans and change the design to get through that particular gateway that the regulator then permits them to move on to the next stage. So in a way, that will be financial, that will be an enforcement and a regulation, and it will obviously be affecting cost.
Okay, thanks. That ties in well with Mustafa's question about the new building regulator and will it have the necessary powers? So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, you could say, what's the point?
Okay, there was a question that came through via Martin Jones in regard to measuring the ability of ductwork systems to resist the spread of fire from one fire compartment to another without the aid of fire dampeners. What significant findings, challenges have you come across with regards to testing the stability, integrity, installation?
I don't know. I won't be able to answer that one.
Well, when
no point trying to waffle my way out of that one.
No. It's a very interesting question, this, because when I was full-time at work, I worked for an organisation. We built 11 major hospitals, and it's principally in the healthcare sector where you have ducting systems and such like, and you have to have fire dampers in there. The dampers have to be accessible for maintenance, and so often they're not in the right place. So a lot of remedial work is done on those. And the ducting has to be cleaned. So again, reverting to the point we raised earlier about refurbishment and maintenance. Maintenance in buildings in particular is absolutely necessarily vital. And that when the design is put together and the building is constructed and the builders are finished and leave, you know, that there has to be a robust maintenance plan in there. And that also will be one of these golden threads, I believe, getting through to resident safety in buildings at the end, whether they're residents in occupation because they live there, or whether they're residents in hospital, as it were, to make them better, or students in schools or student accommodation or whatever. So these things have to be accounted for at the very beginning.
Thanks. So yeah, those are the questions. So I'll hand back over to Tony and say thanks again for both Tony, Ian, and Gavin for this session. We've had our highest number of attendees, so I know it was a topic. So I'll hand back over to Tony, and maybe if there's any one or two final questions anyone wants to come on and ask, but those were the ones from the chat.
Okay then, well, thank you very much to Gav for putting his head in the oven. I mean, put his head up in one of the screens. It is not an easy subject for anyone, and obviously if you're entering into it now, you're on a journey. Those that have spent a long time and developed with it, well, they have more than a leg up, and we just have to keep running these type of sessions, winkling out the difficult issues. But of course we're not even at a crossroads at this stage, because until the government makes up its mind what it wants in legislation, we're going to keep speculating and speculating and hope we can keep the fire safety pot out there in the real world as safe as we reasonably can in the circumstances. So thank you very much for that, Gav. I also thank Ian very much too, because he was dropped on at the very last minute, and it's useful to have his contribution from a different side. And as I said, this hopefully is the first of many, and certainly we would like to use the BRE facilities and that will obviously be in face-to-face because they have a good theatre there, and we would like to continue sort of putting up a session where we can develop these things. So thanks to everybody. Just to remind, there should be a recording which hopefully won't be 1.5 hours. I'll try and chop it into digestible pieces. And there'll also be the overheads available through the website. The YouTube one is a bit more accessible because the branch is responsible for that, and as soon as it's published you can pick up the link and run with it. And the clever ones of you can use Google search, can usually find the Chiltern Branch YouTube's videos, because there's quite a lot we posted now. So I will finish at this point, but I think the chat is still running, and if Melissa wants to add anything, please.
No, the only thing I was putting it in the chat. I saw someone had added a suggestion of maybe hearing about REACH regulations, I guess post-Brexit. So I just wanted to say thanks for that suggestion. We always want to hear from our members and non-members who join our meetings on topics they would like to hear. So we continue to plan based on feedback and, you know, topics that we think would be valuable for our IOSH professionals. So no, that's it. Just thanks very much for joining us, and look forward to, as Tony mentioned, the post-event survey feedback. We look at that. We take the feedback from that as well to look at how we continually improve these meetings. But very great session. So thanks again, Gavin.
Thank you very much. Cheers, everyone. Cheers, Tony and Ian. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Melissa.
Thanks, Tony.